Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into our event today. I am Yasmin Omar. I'm a human rights lawyer and I'm the director of the Democracy Matters Initiative in the Middle East Democracy Center. I am honored to welcome you today to today's discussion Beyond Border, how Israeli impunity fuels regional repression. We are gathered here to engage in a critical discussion on a topic that resonates deeply with MENA experts and followers. As a part of Democracy Matters initiative, we will be working with our esteemed experts members of the DMI advisory group, formed from 8 experts on various country and thematic expertise of the region and to answer the hardest questions about human rights and democracy in the MENA. Addressing recent developments and try to present a vision to promote democracy reform, security, and stability. Today, we have an exceptional panel of experts who bring diverse perspective and deep insights into the complex dynamics at play. Their expertise will help us explore how actions within a nation can ripple across borders, influencing policies, governance, and the lived realities of millions of neighboring countries. In the Middle East and North Africa, the region is where intersection of the most domestic policies and international relations are often starkly visible. In particularly, the ongoing Israeli atrocities in Gaza and the broader context of the impunity that have a far-reaching implication. Our goal is to unpack these issues to understand how the concept of impunity transcends borders and to consider the broader consequences for regional stability. I encourage you to tune in, but think critically, ask questions, and engage with our panelists. We will have some time for questions and answers after our discussion. If you have a question for our panelists, please email to media@mideastdc.org or submit it in the Zoom chat box at the bottom of your screen. As time is limited, I apologize in advance if we don't have time to get to all of your questions. But with that, I am delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists and kick off what I am sure will be a thought-provoking and insightful discussion. First, we have Alaa Sayegh, who is a Lebanese political figure specializing in socio-economic innovation. He is notably known for his contribution to democratic parliamentary reform and policy development in Lebanon and the Middle East. Sayegh is a fellow at the Stanford Center for Democracy Development and the Rule of Law. Welcome, Alaa, and thank you so much for joining us today. Now I will move to introduce our second experts on today's panel, Nariman Shahada Zoabi, who is a Palestinian citizen of Israel. She is a human rights attorney at Adaleh, the legal center for Arab minorities' rights in Israel. Initially, Nariman is focusing on advocacy for marginalized groups and promoting Palestinian civil and political rights, challenging systematic discrimination and advocating for equal protection under Israeli and international law. She has been handling cases related to arbitrary detention, prisoners' rights, freedom of speech related offensives, and accountability. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nariman. To start our conversation, last July, the ICJ declared that Israel's occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is unlawful. Along with the associated settlement regime, annexation, the use of natural resources, the court added that Israeli legislation and measures violate international prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid. Meanwhile, the Israeli government, which historically has operated with impunity for violent, undemocratic practices, is arresting and oppressing citizens who express disapproval and dissent over the ongoing war in Gaza and suppressing demands for human rights and accountability. Emboldened by Israel's impunity, is authorities throughout the Middle East and the North Africa has been similarly repressing free expression and assembly, stifling local hopes and demands for democratic reform. In addition, Direct military escalations in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Iran have fueled growing instability and authoritarian repression across the region and put the whole region on the verge of actual war. With Democracy Matter and initiative, with our group experts today, we were here to discuss how the Israeli government repression of its own people and its human rights violation against Palestinians, a culture of impunity, is contributing to rising autocracy and authoritarianism in the MENA and stifling demands for democracy reform across the region. Together, we will examine innovative ways to instead strengthen civil society and democratic reform, amplify the voices of pro democracy constituencies, and ensure justice and accountability for human rights violations and war crimes. I want to start by Ale and ask him a big question. So, with the recent escalations in Majd al Shams and in southern Lebanon, and the fear of the war expanding into the region following Israel's series of assassinations, how does this, along with international support for Israel, impact and contribute to the political and economic crisis in Lebanon and its stability? And what is the impact on Lebanon's own democratic aspiration and the broader regional struggle for stability and reform?
Hello, Yasmin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this timely discussion and for the important question you've raised. I'll be tackling this into two phases. One, after 300 days plus of this war, definitely things have changed in a huge way. And things are impacting Lebanon not only on the humanitarian and material losses level, but also on the political level as well. As we assess the impact of Israel's action on Lebanon and on the broader region, and definitely the atrocities that are happening on Gaza, that no need to mention them, you mentioned them, and we'll be talking about it, but we are talking about more than 500 deaths in Lebanon, over 2,000 injuries. We are talking about the displacement of more than 100,000 people. We are talking about killing and attacking journalists on the first days of the war, and one of them is Isam Abdallah, and the open case of investigation, and this was raised by Amnesty International, for example, as a potential war crime, and the use of phosphorus on agricultural lands. We are talking about more than $2 billion in direct damages, and up to 8 to 10 billion dollars in indirect damages. We are talking about the prevention of cultivation of more than 15 million square meters of agricultural land. And we are talking about attacking lands with phosphorus that will affect small and medium-sized businesses for many years to come. Having said that, Lebanon is in a very difficult position. It's between the rock of the Israeli atrocities and the Israeli unlimited willingness to commit crimes and to commit more crimes without any real accountability to stop it from what it's doing, and the hard wall of its own political system, the fake democracy living in, the hijacking of warlords since the civil war, who are hijacking all the democratic structures in the country, and of course the hijacking of Hezbollah and the Iranian interests in in using the Palestinian cause to strengthen its ties and its proxy groups in the region. So all of this make it hard to count the violations of the Israeli on the country. And for example, the Lebanese government didn't file one legal file since 300 days till now against all the Israeli atrocities that are happening and all the Israeli violations of international law that are happening towards Lebanon. With all the buzz that the government says, with all the big words that they are saying and all of that, not one legal step has been taken towards this. So this is the first part, the economic and the crisis that is being affected directly by the Israeli war. But there is something to give context for our audience. Lebanon has been suffering economic crisis since 2019, and it has been negotiating with the IMF and other international donors to do main reforms in order to restructure its banking sector and in order to restructure its economy, in order to have a chance to rebuild the economy again after the crisis and the loss in the lira value from 1,500 Lebanese lira in 2019. Now it's around 100,000 Lebanese lira for each dollar. So we are talking about huge devaluation. We are talking about warlords hijacking the parliamentary seats and the parliamentary process. We've managed to get more than 12 MPs in 2022, change MPs that are secular outside the ruling class community into the parliament. But as an indirect effect of the war, that all the political and all the democratic process and the parliamentarian flow has been stopped. And now, not only the international community shifted its interest from political reform and economic reform to support Lebanon to get over its own crisis, but also the ruling class used and abused this moment to have more iron fist on the ground and to make the democratic process paused. And that's what's happening now. It's been 2 years without a president. The parliament is not meeting to elect a president. It's been 2 years without any real economic and political reform. And the moment of war is a good news for warlords who are ruling the country, and definitely it's a good news for Israel, and definitely it's a good news for the Iranian regime, who is being under spotlight of expanding his regional power, and at the same time not under the light of the violation for human rights against activists in Iran and so on. So Lebanon is in a very critical point, and it's really endangered. Its potential democracy is endangered, and its potential change path towards a more open, a more democratic, a more just country is being affected. And we are seeing this in many causes, like the 4th of August explosion and the road for justice in this matter, and the killing of the journalist Sam Abdullah, and the road of justice towards what happened and how to hold Israel accountable and all of that, and in all other matters. And that's the current situation. What's the main question that needs to be answered is Lebanon is not a standalone island. It's in a region, and this region affected by international policies and international and regional political dynamics, and definitely it's affected by the Israeli atrocity. The Israeli atrocity is setting the bar very high for authoritarianism, for extremism, and for political manipulation, and for democracy manipulation. And we will be talking more about this during the session if we have time for that. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Ale. And what you've mentioned, all these realities, all these facts are staggering as the reality of everybody who lives in the MENA, not just in Lebanon, not just in Israel, but also you brought some very important point about rule of law and about legal proceedings to ensure accountability, and how is this being frozen because of the ongoing continuing violations and the lack of enforcement of rule of law. And that takes me to ask Nariman, our legal expert today. Well, rule of law is a fundamental principle of democracy. The law, however, is double-edged sword. While we use it as a tool to ensure order, to ensure protection, it's often used by authoritarian regimes to legitimize oppression. Scholars and international organizations, and recently the ICJ, have argued or have confirmed that Israel's foundational laws and practices represents a colonial and apartheid regime rather than one with democratic principles. And here I want to ask, and it's never too late to ask, is Israel is a democracy? Can you explain more about the legal and historical background of the Israeli regime?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Ala. And of course, thanks for the audience for taking the time to participate with us in this discussion. Before we can truly engage in discussion about the state of democracy in Israel, it's essential to establish the appropriate framework for understanding the Israeli regime. Some scholars would argue that labeling it as a democracy in the traditional sense is problematic, given the colonial and apartheid nature of the state, as highlighted in a lot of academic writings and acknowledged by leading international human rights organizations such as Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. To discuss Israeli democracy without addressing these fundamental aspects is to ignore the reality on the ground. Some would argue that Israel's foundational laws and practices are rooted in colonial domination and apartheid, as highlighted by a leading international human rights organization and scholars. For instance, Amnesty International report from 2022 documents how Israel imposes a system of apartheid through various means, including territorial fragmentation, legal discrimination, and the restriction of movement and access to resources for Palestinians. Similarly, Human Rights Watch report from 2022 argues that Israel's policies meet the legal definition of apartheid as set in the international law. Also, scholars have long critiqued Israel's system as colonial and apartheid-like. For example, the work of Ilan Pape, particularly in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, describes how the foundation of the Israeli state involved the deliberate expulsion of Palestinians and the destruction of their villages, framing this as a settler colonial project. Now, zooming into the Israeli legal system shows a long list of legislations supporting this argument. Laws such the Law of Return from 1950, which grants citizenship to Jews worldwide while denying the right of return to Palestinian refugees, and the Absentee Property Law from 1950, which legalized the confiscation of Palestinian land, are further evidences of Israel's colonial and apartheid structure. These laws entrench a system where Jewish identity is prioritized at the expense of the Palestinian rights. Additionally, the emergency regulations inherited from the British Mandate era remains in effect, authorizing significant violations of Palestinian rights, particularly in the realm of land ownership, freedom of movement, and political expression. These regulations allows for measures such as administrative detentions, house demolitions, and confiscation of land, further solidifying the unequal power dynamics and systematic discrimination that characterize the Israeli regime. Another recent law in this context is the recent Jewish nation-state law from 2018. This law is one of the most explicit manifestations of this reality. It enshrines Jewish supremacy, declaring Israel as the national homeland of the Jewish people, prioritizing Jewish settlements as a national value, and demoting Arabic as an official language. This legal framework is not new, but is a continuation of decades of systematic discrimination, institutionalized through laws and policies since the state's founding. Besides that, when addressing the question of democracy, it's crucial to acknowledge Israel's control over not only the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but also Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and even in the diaspora. For example, Palestinians in East Jerusalem hold residency status without the right to vote in national elections, while Palestinians in the West Bank live under military occupation and face daily violence and land confiscation. In Gaza, the situation is even more dire. 2 million Palestinians have been living under siege for over 16 years, subject to Israel's control over essential aspects of their lives, from access to food and medical supplies to freedom of movement. And Gaza's people now are facing escalated war, which described by official UN bodies as genocidal in nature. These realities challenge the notion of Israel as a democracy. And many would argue that how can a state be considered democratic when it exercises control over the lives of millions of Palestinians, denying them basic civil and political rights and subjecting them to violence and oppression? And it's a very legitimate question to start the discussion with.
Nariman, the facts that you just listed to us, the legal background of colonization, of illegal occupation in Palestine, is just an ideal environment for authoritarianism, ideal environment for repression, and it makes us question that in a region where we see a completely relapsing democracy reform. We're seeing a rising in authoritarianism, and we're seeing a rising in grave human rights violations throughout the region. And now comparing these facts to the situation in Israel, it's not a surprise to see that in a culture of impunity and forgiveness with all these violations could result this reality. But also this takes me again to Alaa. And as you see in Alaa from what Nariman brought in her intervention, it is still even with the ongoing war on Gaza, with the grave atrocities committed every day, it's virtually impossible to discuss democracy or democracy reform in the Middle East without being barraged by the mantra that is Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. However, its policy, as clarified by Nariman and by you, and its identity as an occupying state and the complete ignorance of the international consensus of calls for applying human rights and international humanitarian laws, the bombing of civilians in Lebanon, all this paint a different picture. What are the broader implications for the region, in your opinion? How do we see this manifested throughout the region, and how can the regional and international actors effectively intervene to support peace and prevent further deterioration?
I will start from where Nariman ended, and I definitely agree with her interpretation. The real question we must ask is, who are the war criminals, the colonists, and the manipulators of the 21st century? These are not defined by ethnicity or religion, but by actions that perpetuate injustice, occupation, and suffering. Definitely, those are not the Palestinians in this case. And being very forgiving as an international powers and putting an upper hand over all international laws and international committees in the favor of Israel, and then coming and preaching the Arab region and the Arab region people about democracy and the human rights will make the argument very, very weak. Policymakers and people of the Middle East are far from naive when it comes to the regional politics and the global power dynamics that shape their lives. We understand how the global system operates, and we are actually aware of the forces at play. What we are asking for is not a utopian ideal of integrity, honesty, decency, though those would be welcome if they are to be offered by the international community and so-called international community and the and allowing the ICJ and all other international bodies to apply the law on Israel as well. But a balanced approach from the United States, from the European countries, from the international powers toward the MENA region is what the minimum that we ask for. And here we urge American politicians, policymakers, and government to be conscious of the manipulation orchestrated by the Israeli government and Netanyahu, which often distorts reality to justify actions that exacerbate the conflict and undermine peace. And here it's important to see this ceasefire talks now, and the whole ceasefire talks that needs to be more transparent, because after 300 days of war, and everyone is calling for ceasefire, and even global powers issuing statements calling for ceasefire, and this ceasefire didn't happen yet. It's only giving more time for Netanyahu to continue his genocidal work and his war crimes against civilians, and in Gaza and in Lebanon and everywhere in the region. And at one point and moment in time, suddenly the Israeli government is very precise in targeting and can target its enemies on top level. How can all the civilian bombing be justified where you have all this technological advancement and this precision in attacking your enemies? So, and where is the transparency of this ceasefire talks and deal and going back and forth, that it's only giving more time for the oppressor? So here we come into a question And this question is to our friends in the United States and everywhere in the world, but we are addressing United States because it's the country that's holding the negotiation papers and the country that have the upper hand theoretically over Israel. It's clear Netanyahu's agenda is to stay in power at any cost. And it's clear what's his own agenda is to escalate the war into a regional war where the NATO and the US Army fight for his own agendas. But what's not clear is what are the agendas of those countries. Is their agenda is to justify whatever Israel is doing? Is their agenda is to bluff with and for the Israeli government, or their agenda is a balanced approach based on values and based on what they preach to be applied in the region? And here we implore the US not to repeat the mistakes of the past, such as the disastrous invasion of Iraq. Because who benefited from this invasion? Only Iran and other extremist groups. Who benefited from the militant action in Syria, other than Iran, that have more today? They have more than 500 military spots inside Syria. So even this strategy is not serving the US policy. Let's start from here. So if this strategy to dismantle extremist groups or authoritarian regimes by not setting Israel as an example, you are only making authoritarianism more relevant in its own context. So, and this is a real thing to look at and to push for as research centers in the States, as lobby groups, advocacy groups, working in the MENA region, policymakers in the States, pushing for the third narrative that is, you can be against extremism and at the same time you can be against the Israeli violations of international law and against the Israeli atrocities, and to look in another lens that those two are justifying each other and only making the case even hard for democracy on the ground in the Arab region. And this is evident since the Iraq war till today, with all the countries from Iraq to Syria. So this is not the United States that one would want to see. And it's not the United States that can inspire democracy, justice, and rule of law. That's why calling for a US strategy toward the MENA that is rooted in the very values the US professes to champion, those enshrined by the Constitution, by its founders. A strategy that prioritizes American interests while reflecting the voices of American people and American youth in the universities. And here, this glimpse of hope, it comes from in the darkest times, and it comes from the youth of the United States who are doing this outstanding movement in the universities, and they are being paying prices for it, and we all know that. But the US should not allow its foreign policy to be dictated by the interest of a powerful lobby group or handful of populist politicians. Instead, it should forge a path that genuinely promotes peace, democracy, and the well-being of all the people in the region, and to have more balanced strategy and approach towards the MENA region. Then, only then, people will find human rights and democracy contextual for them, and not a tool to be used against them. And here, I know it's not the time to raise this question, and many people, they say it's not the time to raise it. It's the time for ceasefire and to stop the genocide. But it's the time to reflect on all the international laws that emerged after the World War II. All those constitutions and laws, are they a tool against the opponents of the large power, or they are tools to transform this world into a more just and democratic and open world? So that's what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Ale. And honestly, what you've said is what we all have been dreaming of. What we have all been noticing piece by piece going on throughout the region. And while you talk about the importance of enforcing peace, of enforcing rule of law, of understanding how the political manipulation of policies in the MENA is contributing to the increasing agony of the people, that does not stop human rights violations from happening on a daily basis, and the increase even in those violations. And that brings me to go back to Nariman and ask her about the human rights violations against Palestinians who have continuously escalated following October 7th, and with new revelations about systematic torture, including rape in Israeli prisons like Sidi Teman. The latest news in light of all this, the ongoing war on Gaza, like Ale mentioned, the surge in political imprisonment in the West Bank, and the suppression of Palestinian citizens within Israel. What must happen to create a just democratic rights respecting in the MENA, and of course for the people in Israel and Palestine? And also, like, what is your vision to move forward from the stifled situation we are in now?
Thank you, Yasmin. I agree with the questions that Ala raised in his intervention. So I see the beneficiaries of the crisis in the MENA in a broader sense, but I still agree with most of the questions that Ala raised. To tackle your question, I want to start by describing what is happening in the area after October 7, which marked a significant intensification of the Israeli government's effort to suppress Palestinian and revealing the undemocratic nature of its policies and actions. I definitely will start with what's happening in Gaza. The ongoing war in Gaza has resulted in catastrophic human rights violations, as documented by various UN bodies. Reports indicate that in the past 10 months, thousands of women and children have been killed, with the death toll among children alone reaching alarming numbers. The deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructures, including hospitals and schools, has escalated the humanitarian crisis. These actions not only violate international humanitarian law, but also reflect a broader strategy to dismantle Palestinian society in Gaza under the guise of military occupation. Same in the West Bank, where the numbers of political prisoners has increased dramatically, with reports indicating an increase from 4,000 prisoners before the war to over 10,000 prisoners now in Israeli prisons. Many of these arrests are arbitrary through the unconstitutional means of administrative detention, targeting individuals for their political beliefs or resisting to the occupation. While the conditions in the prisons are inhuman and unbearable, with reports about the lack of basic living standards such as food, hygiene, medical treatment, and more. At the same time, in the past month, the expansion of the illegal settlements continues to accelerate, with settlers emboldened to commit acts of violence against Palestinians with near total impunity. The violence includes attack on Palestinian homes, mosques, and farms, often carried out with the tacit or explicit support of the Israeli security forces, as happened last week in the Palestinian village Gate. The lack of accountability for these crimes further entrenches the apartheid-like conditions under which Palestinians in the West Bank live. Now, speaking about Palestinian citizens of Israel, my immediate area of work throughout the past few months, I will start by mentioning the severe crackdown on the right to free speech and assembly. Arbitrary arrests have been made over speech-related offenses with more than 170 Palestinians, including minors, indicted for social media posts related to the ongoing war and charged with articles from the counterterrorism law, or arrested for participating in demonstrations and accused under the same law due to the slogans they chanted. The criminalization of speech has also been evident in universities, where more than 160 students have faced disciplinary procedures over their social media posts, reflecting a trend of shrinking academic freedom and dominating the narrative within academic institutions. At the same time, hundreds of employees have faced expulsion or disciplinary actions at their workplaces for similar reasons, indicating that various institutions are participating in the suppression of the Palestinian narrative. This regression in the freedom of expression is indicative of a broader authoritarian trend where Palestinians are increasingly criminalized. At the same time, those who incite violence against Palestinians, whether politicians, officials, journalists, or ordinary people, often go unpunished, reflecting a broader policy of impunity and blatant disregard for the rule of law. Mentioning more severe violations, and as we speak today, Israel holds the bodies of 5 of its Palestinian citizens, refusing to return them to their families. These bodies are being held as bargaining chips for potential future swap deal, a practice that starkly illustrates the hierarchy in citizenship status within Israel. This treatment reveals the reality that not all citizens are considered equal under the law. Palestinian citizens are subjected to discriminatory practices that would be unimaginable if applied to Jewish citizens. This hierarchy within citizenship further undermines the claim that Israel operates as a true democracy. As our time is limited, and there is a lot to cover, I would use the remaining time to address the horrific testimonies of the torture in State Yemen that published recently in the media, and you mentioned, Yasmin. Among the illegal legislations and practices that Israel has intensified, particularly after October 7, I want to speak more detailed about the amendment to unlawful combatants law, originally from 2002, that was enacted in the Israeli Knesset last December and making significant changes to detention procedures. This law has been used to justify the indefinite detention of Palestinians without charge or trial and stripping them of basic legal protections. This amendment allows individuals, including minors, to be detained without an arrest warrant for up to 45 days, a sharp increase from the previous 96 hours limit. Judicial oversight of this detention was also extended, with scrutiny deferred for up to 75 days compared to 14 hours previously. And the duration for which a detainee can be denied access to legal counsel was extended from 10 days up to 180 days, means 6 months, half a year, with no legal counsel with court approval. Testimonies have emerged detailing the inhuman conditions and torture that Palestinian detainees endure, particularly in State Yemen. These physical, mental, and sexual abuses are not isolated incidents perpetrated by individual soldiers, but rather reflect a broader policy sanctioned at the supervisory level. The brutality of these practices is not only a result of the unlawful combatant law, but also a consequence of the systematic lack of accountability that has characterized Israel's approach to Palestinian prisoners for decades. The Israeli judiciary often plays a passive role, frequently rubber stamping government action rather than providing meaningful oversight. The enriched impunity, along other factors, allows for the continuation of such a human rights violation on a wide scale. And one of the most fundamental recommendation should be addressing the end of this impunity.
Thank you so much, Neriman. And while you were speaking, two things came to my mind. First, when you were describing the human rights violations, the escalations of abuse, this is something that we have been noticing rising throughout the MENA, not just in Israel, not just in Palestine, but in countries like Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and even Iran, Saudi Arabia, Emirat, UAE. We have been seeing increasing reports of increasing human rights violations that comes to your mind as a thinker, as a follower of the MENA, as a result of the atrocities and the war in Israel that is creating this umbrella of impunity overshading the whole region. And the second thing is the complicated legal situation and the complicated legislations that is created to control the society, and how is this has been a spread practice among authoritarian regimes in the region, how they continue to play the law, weaken rule of law, and weaken legal institutions to impose this environment of oppression. And well, I wish I had more time to discuss this and delve in deep, but as we are coming towards the end of our time and we have been receiving questions from the audience, I want to try and answer those questions before we take a few minutes to address your recommendations to move from the situation and forward. I apologize in advance to our audience for not being able to take all of the questions, but one important question here, could you talk about the implication of US and European support for Israel's action in Gaza on the broader geopolitical of the MENA region, particularly regarding democratic movements? I don't want to impose the question on any of you, but please feel free to answer. Ale, do you have any?
Sorry, where can I read the question? It's in the chat. Is it in the chat? You are muted, Yasmin. Yasmin, you are on mute if you are hearing me.
Yes, and I am posting the question from the audience in the chat for you. Yes, it's
Okay.
there.
As I mentioned before during the discussion, the implications of the US and European support for Israel in Gaza and in Lebanon and in the broader region affects democratic movements negatively because it makes the democratic case in the region hard, and it makes the authoritarianism and violent extremist groups relevant, because you are putting a context where the only relevant thing is to be as a movement to be similar to the enemy, and in this case, their enemy is Israel, or Israel is the enemy of the other groups. So this is on one stand. On the other hand, those regimes, authoritarian regimes and fake democracies, similar to the case of Lebanon and Iraq, they are learning from the West how to manipulate the West into continuing in power in exchange for political favors and services. So what's being applied on Israel as forgiveness for its atrocities and war crimes is affecting all other regimes in the region. So this is on one hand. On the other hand, the democratic movements themselves are becoming caged within a political narrative where they can't mobilize and work freely between those two narratives, the extremist one and the Israeli one. So I hope I answered the question.
Thank you,
Yes,
Ale. I wanted to check with Nariman if she has anything to add.
No, I may answer the next question if you need.
So we have another question from the audience. They're asking, what strategies can human rights advocates use to counteract the influence of Israel's impunity on regional authoritarianism? I think this question that's in place for you, Nariman.
I would think that shedding the lights on the violation as a first step and documented all these violations is a very crucial step to address this situation. And seeing the Israeli legislations that are designed to fulfill some very narrow interests and aims, see it in a broader sense. And second of all is to continue advocating in front of any international bodies and international community and to ask to end the war, at first ceasefire, to end the illegal occupation, and to hold the perpetrators accountable for any and every crime.
Thank you so much, Nariman. And actually, you started us on my last question of the event for you too. As experts, as defenders active on the ground, you have been doing a lot of efforts to promote democracy and to promote accountability and justice for your countries and for the whole region. What is your recommendations to the international community, to civil society, to pro-democracy constituents? How do we move from here, and how can we form a narrative for what is democracy for us in the MENA? Ale?
Thank you, Yasmin. I will start with the ways forward and recommendations for the international communities. And some might apply for some specific civil society actors and defenders who work on some issues on a global scale. First, debunking the myth that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. In light of recent events and all the discussion, and Israel's policies are characterized by systematic repression and human rights violations that undermine the very democratic value it claims to uphold. This narrative not only distorts the reality on the ground, but also obscures the severe impacts of Israeli actions on regional stability and the broader pursuit of democracy in the MENA region. The other one is related to the question I answered about the compromised stance of the West. And I see it as a global threat. The West's unyielding support for Israel, despite its going violations of international law, possesses a significant threat to the credibility of the Western democratic values. This unwavering backing, particularly from the United States and the European Union, emboldens Israeli policies that are antithetical to the principles of democracy, justice, and human rights. A compromised Western stance on Israel not only destabilizes the Middle East, but also diminishes the global standing of democratic ideals. There is a threat to American democracy, which is the IPAC that is influencing over the US policy in the Middle East and often shaping it in ways that undermine American democratic values. And it prioritizes Israel's interest over a balanced and just approach to the region. This must stop. And there is a call for a new approach, a post-October 7th approach for the US policy. The current US policy towards the region is outdated. Towards Lebanon, Palestine, it remains entrenched in outdated paradigms, particularly in the aftermath of the events of October 7th. This stance no longer serves the interests of peace or stability in the region. It is imperative for the United States to reassess this approach, moving beyond a post-October 7th approach mindset to one that is genuinely addresses the complexities of the region and fosters conditions for lasting peace and democracy. For other than governmental bodies. So we have to push for transparent ceasefire discussions. This is a must at this point. To mobilize advocacy group and lobbyists in the US, in the European countries, and in Arab countries as well, where possible. To strengthen international advocacy and build coalitions with international organization and do global advocacy networks to amplify the call for accountability and justice for Palestine and for the Palestinian cause, and to coordinate efforts to bring attention to the ongoing war crimes and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and in the wider region and in Lebanon. To promote public awareness and to push towards freedom of expression and the protection of the protests in the universities and university campuses, as we are seeing now, the bans of those encampments and face masks and so on. And there is one important thing: to hold big tech accountable. When it comes to a Chinese company operating in the US, you see a congressional questioning, and you see all of that. And when it comes to big tech not being held accountable for their role in shaping narrative surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian war and the war of the Israeli government and the Palestinian people, these platforms are not being held accountable. On the contrary of that. And we have to advocate for transparency on how algorithms and content moderation policies are applied, and the use of AI and technologies in killing the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people, and being used in war zones and in war context. And this needs an engagement with those tech companies to encourage more balanced and responsible approach to content moderation and all of that. So this is it from my side.
Thank you so much, Ale. And quickly, because we are at time, I wanted to ask if Nariman has any further recommendations.
You know, Ala's recommendations are really comprehensive and apparently covers all the involved factors. But still, I want to emphasize the need to cease fire right now and to push toward the political solution to promote peace and stability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for the amazing expertise, the amazing backgrounds and realities and facts you shared with us and the audience today. We are in awe for all of your efforts and for all of your brave work on the ground. And MEDC will continue to bring voices from the ground, from experts on the MENA to public events, and to be able to create a collective narrative about what is democracy for us today, what is the way forward for peace, prosperity, and to guarantee human rights for all the people in the MENA. It's clear that ceasefire now is where we start a discussion about democracy reform in the MENA, accountability for rising human rights violations throughout the region, not just in Israel and Palestine, Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, the Gulf. I feel that your recommendation today, Ale, applies to the whole regions and to the whole developments coming since October 7. Thank you so much for a great discussion, and we will see you again in other events. And I appreciate everyone who joined our event today. This event will remain on YouTube and other platforms to return to. We appreciate your engagement, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nariman.